Hi, everybody. Welcome, welcome. We're just going to go ahead and give ourselves a couple more seconds as we get some people who are still coming in from the waiting room. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're super excited to have you here. If you wouldn't mind going ahead during the presentation piece, we're going to go ahead and record. If you wouldn't mind taking yourself off camera and muting yourselves, we're going to go ahead and after the presentation, we're going to turn everybody's cameras back on and you can unmute yourselves and we'll have discussion then. But this way we can really just highlight the presenters. All right, a couple more people coming in through the waiting room. And we'll go ahead and start getting started. All right, everybody, welcome to ISMTE's Office Hours. Today we'll be discussing team building in the times of COVID. Today our hosts are Erin, Landis, our ISMTE board president, and Brook, Simpson, who is also with AGA. I'm going to go ahead and take myself off camera as well, and I'm going to hand it over to our presenters. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Donna. Hi, everybody. I'm Brooke. I'm going to be one of your hosts today. Just give me 1 minute to share my screen and we can get started. Okay, hopefully, get rid of this. You can see my screen now. Welcome again, everyone, to our office hour session for today. As Donna noted, we're going to be talking about team building in the times of COVID, which I think should be a very interesting discussion. Just as an FYI regarding the format of our session, we're going to be starting with a brief presentation, approximately 15 minutes or so by myself and Erin. And then at that point, we're going to be transitioning over to a Q&A and a discussion with the group until the last 5 minutes or so of the session when I have a few closing slides to share. As Donna noted, we're going to have cameras and mics off during this presentation part, but once that concludes, we would encourage you to please turn on your cameras and mics for the discussion period. We will also be monitoring the chat. If you have any questions or comments that you want to share, please feel free to make use of that. And the session will be recorded. It is already recording right now, and it will be made available on the ISMTE website after we conclude. To give you a brief introduction of your hosts today, my name is Brook Simpson. I am the Senior Publications Manager at the American Gastroenterological Association. In that capacity, I'm a managing editor of our flagship journal, Gastroenterology. I have been at AGA for over 15 years now, and I've been involved in management and cultivating our team environment, I would say, for over a decade at this point. And I'm joined today with my co-host, Erin. I will pass it over to her to introduce herself.
Thanks, Brooke. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you're calling in from. As Brooke and Donna mentioned, I'm Erin Landis. I'm the Vice President of Publications at AGA. And in that capacity, I just help oversee the portfolio of journals that we have. And like Brooke, we have been very focused for quite some time now on team building for our particular department in the organization. And I think that we've carried forward during COVID what we had started to build for our team in the previous decade, and sort of used all of those lessons to continue to build our team in a remote setting context.
Okay, thank you, Erin. Before we get into our presentation, we want to give a special shout out to J&J Editorial. They are sponsoring our office hours session today, so thanks very much to them for their support. And Erin and I have no conflicts to declare related to the topic of our discussion today. Okay, so for many of us, I think it's safe to say that the pandemic has disrupted the dynamics of our teams in one way or another. And as Erin mentioned, we've worked hard at AGA to ensure that our team members feel supported and engaged despite the less than ideal circumstances that we are all living in right now. So to kick off our discussion, Erin and I would like to review some of the examples we have of how we've strived to build connection and energy and synergy really with the members of our publications team. So we're going to go through those right now. Up first, I'm going to talk a little bit about our team retreat. So a few years ago, we hosted our first ever publications team retreat. This was a half-day series of activities that we crafted to learn more about each other as people, as coworkers, and then how our team really operates when we're all working at our very best. So to do this, we completed several exercises. I've highlighted a couple of them on this slide. The first is called the Clifton Strengths Assessment by Gallup. This is a quiz that each team member took as pre-work ahead of our retreat. And during the retreat, we went over the results of that assessment, which gives you basically your top 5, what they call talent themes. And we charted the results for all of our team members to see where our overall team strengths lie among 4 overarching domains, which are called executing, influencing, relationship building, and strategic thinking. And our thought here was that knowing the strengths of our colleagues would be a useful tool in building high-functioning project teams that we would collate for our day-to-day work at AGA. We also worked together to create our own team values, and this was based on a process I learned about in a book called Dare to Lead by Brené Brown. I was inspired after reading this book and suggested to Erin that the process may be useful for our team to complete. This collaborative effort was designed to give us guideposts to our intentions and our behaviors in our day-to-day work. I think it's important to note that our organization, AGA, already had company-wide values in place, but the values that we created during this retreat are unique and specific just to us, and we reference them frequently in our interactions. I also want to note that this retreat was not run by a third party, and it did not require any sort of expertise. Several members of our department were interested in leading this process, and we did our own research on what we thought would be most useful and how to facilitate the exercises that we completed. And while we did host this retreat in person at the time, we've always had several staff members on our team that work full-time remote, and they were equally engaged in this process. And now that we're all full-time remote, I think this would transition relatively seamlessly to a virtual environment. And in fact, I'm hoping to do a new one of these retreats fully virtually sometime in the coming year. So the retreat, I think, was a great success, and the poster you see on this slide demonstrates the outcome of some of our work. Together, we decided on 2 values for our department: adaptability and service, which we fleshed out with the value statements you see beneath the icons. This retreat was completed back in 2009, and at the time we had no idea just how applicable our adaptability value would be a year from then. The bottom portion of the poster outlines our team strengths. The size of the 4 circles correlates to where the talent themes of our team members fall under these 4 overarching domains. So this poster is printed and framed and hanging in our physical office, but it's also posted virtually in Microsoft Teams, where we do a lot of our work. And in addition, our values are printed on accessories like notepads, water bottles, and we reference them frequently when giving recognition to team members. So I think it's safe to say that these values really do serve as sort of a North Star for our intentions and our team culture, even though we're fully remote at this time. And Erin's going to go over this slide.
Right. So in addition to our values, we also have a strategic plan for our journals portfolio at AGA, and it runs, it's a 5-year plan. And you can see here from this slide that we focus on 5 key strategic issues for our portfolio. And the reason that I'm sharing this with you is that another way that we sort of build culture with our team is to tie our individual objectives for any given year to the strategic plan. So every year, as is the case in most organizations, we have personal objectives that we need to meet. And I've always wanted to be sure that people's objectives are meaningful and point towards something larger than the specific work they might do. So for example, in 2022, we're asking our team to take a look at the strategic plan and think about tactics that they might employ in service of the strategic issues. So again, this is just another sort of collective, cohesive way to bring our team together and make sure that we're all aligned and all on the same page. And in doing so, that really adds to the culture of our team. And then another thing that we try to do to build team cohesion and team culture is to have get-togethers. And in the past, we had obviously in-person get-togethers, but we were able to pivot during the pandemic and in this remote environment and still have virtual gatherings. So one of the things we did prior to the pandemic was have a summer cookout for those who were local to the area, where we would all gather. And I was usually the one to host those, but clearly we couldn't do that for the past couple of years for safety reasons. So instead we gathered virtually, and we still had a cookout, so to speak, in the summer, but instead we just gathered and did some fun activities. I think last year we did musical bingo. I worked with a group out of New York to help with that. This past summer, we did a trivia session, and sort of was like a variety of games. And I worked with a company out of California. And I would say that sometimes it's helpful to have a budget for these things, but you don't necessarily need to have a budget. In those cases, I did work with an outside company, but we could have easily sort of done this ourselves and not spent any money on it. And we also routinely try to have virtual coffee breaks. We celebrate work milestones. For example, one of our team members just celebrated her 10th year. And then we have holiday celebrations too. And I think just a week or so, we will have a little bit of a holiday celebration where we'll kind of open gifts and spend some time together that way.
Okay, so I'm going to jump back in here. I think it goes without saying that communication is really a key element for a high functioning team. At AGA, we use Microsoft Teams, like I mentioned before. And I think we've all maybe been a little bit surprised at how it has turned into a truly invaluable resource for our group, particularly now that we're all remote during the pandemic. So we have a lot of team channels to sort of organize our conversations. And that includes teams specifically for each of our publications. That allows us to organize our communications really easily and then make it simple to reference threads if we ever need to go back and look at something in the future. I have an example here on this slide. As you can see, I started a new thread on Teams for every issue of the journal that I manage. This makes it really easy to outline deadlines for everybody. Comments are available in this central location from all the staff members that are involved in the issue content. And we find this much easier to manage than having emails flying in and out of your inbox that are easy to get lost in the shuffle or might not have all the relevant parties copied. So this has been really helpful for us. And it's also important to note that Teams isn't just useful for the work. We also use it as a hub for our camaraderie. We have channels like Pubs Family, where we all share personal photos of our kids or our pets, or the photo on this slide here, which was actually taken on the day that we completed our Pubs retreat that I mentioned earlier. And as you can see, though, most of us were together. We did include our virtual employees as well. We also have a When You Need a Laugh channel. And this is great for those times where you just need like a mental breather with the help of a funny meme or a tweet that someone might share. This is one of my all-time favorites. So these social outlets provide opportunities for us to connect with one another in a way that might not be so easy when we're not physically together and having hallway chats on the way to and from meetings. We also hold a monthly departmental staff meeting, and this is certainly not a new concept, but I'd like to highlight a few things that might make ours a little bit unique. We have what we refer to as our huddle board, which is what you see on the screen. This is an Excel file with worksheets for each month of the year. And we use this as a guide for our staff meetings. So before each meeting, every staff member fills out a list of their key priorities for the month. And then we use this to facilitate the discussion. This helps ensure that we're not operating in silos with our projects. We kick off every meeting with an icebreaker. And you may think of icebreakers as cringy activities that you do with a group of people you might not know very well. But even though we work very closely together, it's nice to take a moment away from that and just sort of connect in, funny or silly ways. We've asked questions like, if you could only listen to one song for the rest of your life, what would it be? The one on your screen is about what you love about fall. So it really spans the gamut of topics. And we also make a point during these meetings to offer recognition to our team members. So this recognition also spans the gamut of, congratulating someone on a major project or milestone, or even just lending a hand with an unexpected task, or being there to support you when you're having a rough day. I would say that these activities probably take no more than 15 minutes each month, but I think they really go a long way to building that connection with the team members that are involved. Okay, so that is a super quick overview of some of the tactics that we've found successful at AGA. I am going to stop sharing my screen in a moment so we can move into the discussion portion. I know Erin and I are excited to hear about your experiences with building team environments, and maybe even a couple of failures if you have any, hopefully not too many. So let me stop sharing my screen and we can start talking.
Yeah, and I think you can all share your video if you're comfortable. And there are a couple questions, Brooke, in the chat that I thought we could answer before we jump into our first poll. How many people are on your team? This is from John. We have 11 currently on our team. And that is interesting because the first poll asks people to tell us how many people are on your team. And do you want to take the second question, Brooke? Does your larger organization have defined values? How do you mesh department values with larger org values? And this is from Audra.
Yes, so we do have larger values at AGA. They're rather broad, I would say. So I'm trying to think, innovation, what are they?
Open, engaged.
Open. Yeah, so they're a little bit more broad, but we did make a point during the retreat to mention that the values that we created for our own team were meant to sort of work in synergy with the AGA's values. So we weren't trying to supersede them. And I think that's worked out pretty well because we have our values integrated into a lot of our processes. So for example, when we have quarterly check-ins, and we have our year-end check-in. And during that time, one of the things that we discuss is how we have sort of lived into the values of AGA. And we also integrate our pub's values into that process, including our monthly staff meetings where I showed you the recognition part of our huddle board, and we'll frequently put a little hashtag adaptable in there. So it's worked out rather seamlessly that we're sort of incorporating all of them more or less, I would say, into our daily work at AGA.
And then Michelle asked, how often do you have staff meetings? And did you have to adjust the frequency when the team went fully remote? For our full team, we have a meeting once a month, and no, we didn't adjust the frequency. The other piece of this too is that, and we typically have weekly or biweekly check-ins between supervisors and direct reports. And that's another way to stay connected and have build that culture.
I would say we have quite a lot of those kind of check-ins. As Erin said, we have the staff and supervisor check-in, but we also have a management team check-in where all of the publication managing editors, as well as the director and vice president, sit down every week for an hour to check in and talk with each other. And I think those have been crucial to building a strong team environment with the management group, where we all feel very open to come with anything that's on our minds, anything we want some thoughts on, whether it's big or small. And we also have a lot, there's a lot of meetings, a lot of check-ins, but I find them very useful. We have those with our publisher, we have them with our editors in chief, we have them across the gamut, but at least at AGA, I think they've been incredibly useful for feeling like we're all part of this group together.
All right, so to get us started, I'm going to go ahead and launch this first poll. So the first question is, how many people are on your publications team? All right, 100, oops, sorry about that. Let me go ahead and end it, and I will share the results. So it's a good mix of, people being is a team of 1 all the way up to more than 10. So I just kind of wanted to set a baseline for our discussion today, because I think sometimes, there's this thought that if you have a very small team there, you don't necessarily need to build culture. But I think that regardless of the size of your team, the culture of your team is really important to the effective operations of your group. So I will go ahead and stop sharing that, and I will launch the second poll, which will lead us into some discussion. Actually, let's see, Donna, I don't see, oh, here it is. Got it, found it. All right, here's the second poll. So how important do you think culture is for a thriving team?
I'm curious to see if anybody says not important at all.
All right, that we had 100% participation there. So I will share the results. So it looks like there's majority think that it's very important. So about 30% think it's somewhat important. So I was hoping that we could use this as a little bit of a discussion point. So for those of you who think it's very important, would you be willing to just share your thoughts on why you feel that it's very important? Please don't be shy. We're here just to have a conversation.
I can go. So I feel like, in a solidly working organization, everybody knows what their job responsibilities are, but especially when you're really trying to push forward on big strategic goals that require just more than one person working on them, I feel like you need to have really good team cohesion to get those things done. And I also feel like in times of struggle, whether it's like somebody needs to go out on medical leave or, whatever, these things happen all the time. Your team needs to be able to pull together and still kind of either cover enough to get by or push forward on those goals. So I feel like really good communication and cohesion is, I think, just super important in order to be of good service to your organization.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. I would agree with that. Does anyone have anything to add to Michelle's comments?
In the office, which I haven't been to for a long time, I have a little poster up that says "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." And I think that the idea is that culture gets lots of people on board with moving in generally the right direction without you actually having to say what it is that you're trying to do. You all know that you're, in this case, we're looking for a quality product and good customer service, because that's what everybody around you is doing. And I do think that this is the thing that's being weakened the most by us all working remotely, especially for new starters.
That's a really good quote. I think I'm going to use that going forward. I completely agree. I feel like if you have that good team culture, then you're aligned in that way, then carrying out those larger strategic issues and plans are facilitated. Does anyone have anything else to add to?
So Erin,
Michelle?
I see there's an interesting question in the chat about how do we bring new staffers into existing culture? And I know we have one of our colleagues at AGA here today, Gina, who actually joined us during this time and has been the first, well, that's not true because we do have some remote people full time, but at least the first pandemic hire that we've had to fully bring on board during this time period. So she might have some interesting thoughts into that, but I know that on our side, we made a deliberate effort as early as the interview process for filling this position to highlight the importance of culture for our particular team. And that included going over things like our strategic plan and going over our the poster that I shared that had our values and our strengths on it. So it would be clear from the outset that that's a priority for us. And I think Gina can say whether or not that was successful, but I think that was a good way of integrating that as early as possible into that process.
Yeah, and I can jump in. I've been pleasantly surprised by the whole onboarding process. I remember when I first did start, I was very nervous about, starting a new job in a remote environment and what the team culture would be like. I did know that a lot of people had already been on the team for quite some time, and I was a little bit nervous about whether or not I'd be able to feel like I was a part of it, or like I don't know, been missing something. But very quickly, I feel like I was welcomed as if I'd also been there for 10 years. I remember right at the beginning, we did have a coffee chat and I was like, oh, what are we going to talk about? And we ended up talking about TV shows and things we had in common there. And it was just those little things that, it really did help me get to know my colleagues on more than just a work level. And just one small thing that I think has helped, that I think a lot of organizations are doing during COVID, but just having the video on during those conversations all the time, even though we were remote, I didn't feel like I was just talking to voices. I could see people. I could comment on how I liked Brook and Erin's wallpaper in the background. It was just little things that, spark conversation when you do have that video on. So I can attest to Brook and Erin's points that I think all of the culture building tactics that they've done, I think they've all been really helpful to my transition. And I definitely feel like part of the team. And I had worked full-time in an office setting before this. And honestly, I feel like the remote experience I've had with AGA, I feel even more team culture than I did when I was in the office with my other team. So I definitely think you can build that culture remotely if you take that time to do tactics like these.
I do want to share a comment from Bethany in the chat, who says, I think culture is important to create trust between team members and stay in touch. We're all remote and all over the globe to keep work moving forward without everyone becoming overwhelmed. Thank you, Bethany. Did you want to add anything to that comment? Not to put you on the spot, but. So for those
we
of
have
you,
a hand raised, Erin.
sorry.
Audra.
Yeah, hi. I was just going to comment. I know Bethany in her chat said that she couldn't be on camera or mic, which is unfortunate, but I wanted to echo what she was saying in terms of culture and trust and the importance of trust. And I know with my own team undergoing a lot of change in the last year, that culture really comes through a lot in that. And if there are some issues that you're having with culture or with trust, it does make it harder to get buy-in with some of the changes. And you might have, pockets of your team that are really enthusiastic and other pockets that are more hesitant. And to try to get that cohesion can be difficult if you don't have the consistency of culture across the board with everyone.
I guess a follow-up question for me is, for those of you who have smaller teams, is culture important to you also? And how do you work on that culture? How do you create that? Is it similar to bigger teams, or is it anything different?
I'm happy to jump in. I have 2 people on my team, and we're actually part of larger teams. So our journals department is 3 people, soon to be 4, which is very exciting for me. But then we're also part of the communications team. And I think that having kind of the cascading team culture is really good, because we have company-wide Zoom meetings each month. And so that kind of brings our small team into the larger culture. And those team meetings, they're very interesting because they're part business and part fun. Like we celebrate people's work anniversaries and birthdays, and we have like a wheel that is spun and people win gift cards. So that's done really well by the company. And then within my own department, I was a pandemic hire, and one of my manuscript coordinators was a pandemic hire. So I think having two of us new to the culture was really interesting because the both of us had to kind of work through it together. But then we have my assistant managing editor. She's been here for 5 years. So she kind of gives us like the secrets and the gossip, as we say. So we have a lunch gossip session essentially every Tuesday. So I meet with my team weekly, and then we meet with the communications team bi-weekly, and then the monthly meeting. I think it's almost too many meetings because it's hard to kind of then focus on the work.
Yeah.
But I think having a small team, you can really foster a sense of tight knit work. Like so, and we use Teams as well. And so we're on chat all day, just checking in with each other. So it's not just emails. And I'm trying to be conscious actually of tech overload. We're on Zoom, we're on Teams, email, and then we also have like an internal like drive that we have everything on. But having a small team, I think it's easy and it's friendly. I've met one of my coworkers 10 years ago. I last saw her. And then my other one I've met twice. So it's really interesting. And I do go into the office. I'm going in next week. I'm flying down to Maryland, and I'll be in there just for like 5 or 6 hours. But and the last time I was down there was August, and I go around and I make sure that I say hi to every single person. And I think that in-person component isn't necessary, but it's helpful.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that. And nice to see you in person, Claire. We've exchanged a lot of emails.
I know we do.
I'm glad you said that, because when Gino, as she said, she was hired during the pandemic. And so we had only known her through the remote environment. But we did have a quick kind of lunch get together outside at was it October? But anyway, it was very nice to meet her in person. And I agree that if you have that opportunity to meet someone in person, take it, because it really adds this other layer of substance and meaning to the relationship that you can't quite replace with just knowing someone virtually.
It's true. I was also thinking about our all staff scrums. Claire, you reminded me of that because that's something new that started. I'm pretty sure that started when we began being full-time remote, and it's a weekly meeting every Friday it's usually about 15 minutes, but everybody's invited to come, and every department gives a very brief report out of anything big going on. And I think it has been incredibly helpful to know what is happening, because at least at AGA, it's easy for publications to sort of just be in our own little corner and do our thing. But it's useful to see what's going on otherwise. And I think we make a lot of connections between what we do and what others do because we're hearing about that every week. So it's useful to connect. And we also highlight milestones and birthdays, but I'm totally going to suggest a wheel where we get to win a gift card, because that sounds awesome.
We also create like fun groups, like we have cats of ACG and dogs of ACG, and that's just like kind of fun. And I see here that Jenny said, familiar with the Doctor Who references, and that's something like for me and my team, we're Marvel people. So any, Marvel news or trailer we're sharing immediately. So that's always like kind of just like a fun break.
Totally.
So there's a lot of pro team culture comments here. Is anyone, I know some people said somewhat to the poll, does anybody want to share any sort of opposing thoughts around team culture, or No one else thinks it is silly for work colleagues to care about birthdays. I love that aspect of the pandemic, not being bothered by that. Brooke, do you want to launch the next poll, or would you like me to?
Let me see if I can figure out how to do this. Yes, I see. Okay, hopefully this will work. I'm hitting launch now. The question is, has your team culture improved or worsened because of the pandemic? Although it just says pan. See what people say here. Okay, I'm gonna close it in 1 second so you can see the results. All right, so we're at about half of attendees think it's more or less stayed the same. And then we've got a few who think it's worse and a few who think it's improved. That's interesting. Does anybody want to comment on why you think it has improved? I'd be really interested to hear what is changed now that is now making this a better element for you.
John?
I think having everybody be virtual improved the culture in my organization as a whole. So we're a team of 5, so we have our own culture, but there's also that of the larger organization. And I think because my team was partially remote anyway before, having everyone be remote in the organization improved the culture for all of us.
I think that's interesting because I think that when you have a hybrid environment, there's definitely there's a whole different ball game than if you're all in person, all remote, and then there's hybrid. I think sometimes the danger with hybrid is that, and I know that we probably experienced this with our publications team, but didn't really recognize it until the pandemic. So as Brooke mentioned, for many years, we had 3 full-time remote people, and then we had our team in the office at AGA in the headquarters. And I really think that the team in the office didn't give a lot of consideration to how to integrate the remote team better. We probably did. We had a lot of activities that were in person only. I think there were times when we were all in a conference room and they were like seeing us at a table. Our heads were really tiny and they were up on the screen. So I think that I completely agree with your point, John, that having one or the other probably works best. But I know the AGA anyway, at least for 2022, is going to be going to a hybrid environment where you can choose where you want to work. So I think there's going to have to be a lot of thought given to how to integrate those who are in the office and those who are remote.
What about anybody who voted that it has worsened? Would you like to share your thoughts on that?
I'll say something. So I think we have quite a big team. We're about 40, 45 people. And I think that within teams, it's been quite good. But what's missing is the interactions between teams. So I meet with my reports, regularly, and we have a fantastic, we have some, as you say, some informal and some work conversation, and we see each other very regularly. We've met up outside for picnics. It's all been great. But we don't get that serendipity, the water cooler conversation. We don't get those sorts of serendipitous conversations. And I think for new people, they don't get to discover that somebody else loves golf or anything like that. So I think that's what we've been missing.
Does anyone have any thoughts on how you could address that missing element in the remote environment?
Do you know, so my husband's he works for another publisher, and they have so they use an add-on to the Slack channel called Donut. I don't know if anyone else has used it, and it assigns you a random person to speak to each week, and so you get to meet everybody. And I suggested it in my organization, and everyone was like, oh, that would be awful. You'd have to like talk to people you don't want to talk to. And so they didn't want to do it. But yeah, that was, and yeah, so I can see that Rachel Russell's putting, that was the worst part of being in the office all day, all the talky. And that a lot of people said, we definitely do not want the donut calls. And they also thought that while maybe half of the people might want to sign up for them, they didn't want to miss out if they were the ones who didn't sign up for them. So we didn't go with donut calls.
I think that we've gotten at some of that a little bit with the virtual coffee breaks. I think Audra has said that too, if I'm reading this. Yeah, some interesting topics do come up. I mean, we do usually have like a conversation starter, but then it kind of segues into other types of conversation where you get to have those more spontaneous conversations. But I agree that it's a little hard to have like that just sort of flyby conversation on a Zoom or Teams call.
Well, and I think, you know, not that we go around the office, used to go around the office eavesdropping, but you know, you go to fill up your coffee cup and you hear somebody talking about a project and you say, oh, you know, I didn't mean to, you know, listen in, but that thing you're working on sounds kind of similar to this thing that we're doing in my totally unrelated department. And maybe we can work together on this, or you should talk to so-and-so because they're doing this thing too. And they could collaborate with you. And yeah, that's the kind of stuff that you miss, the serendipitous.
I think it's really interesting how people are having a mix of reactions to this. And I think that's why at AGA I was pushing so hard for allowing people to work where they feel most comfortable and most productive, because some people don't want that chit chat, other people do. And so if you could kind of choose where you work best, perhaps that will empower everyone to be the most productive.
Just to kind of jump in on that, I actually found that we just did our yearly reviews. And so this is, you know, we're coming into year 2 of the pandemic. And one of my employees, I saw in her previous reviews that she's too much of a water cooler chatter. And now she's definitely more productive. And about 2 or 3 months ago, we had our annual meeting in person. So we definitely had a shift in environment for us. But 2 or 3 months ago, she said, you know, there's no way I want to go back to the office. I'm way too comfortable now. She can see her kids. About a week or so ago, she said, I'm going to be going to the office 4 days. I need it. And so I have to be careful now about, please don't chit chat so much because it's noticed. So I did have to tell her, you know, when you're in there, shut your door every now and then. And so that's something that as we start to come back, and I'm always fully remote too, which the ACG prior to the pandemic did not allow anyone to be remote. And so this has been a huge shift for people in our office, because there's people who are just never going back because they don't feel comfortable. And if you can do your job remotely, that's something that is to take into consideration. So she misses the chit chat, but I have to now temper that for her. Like, all right, when you go back, you have to change your behavior and keep the positivity and keep the productiveness that you have now. So that's something that we're navigating.
I can see that being a challenge just when I think of managing that. If you're not there to see what is happening and if she's following your advice or not, that you know, it's like a whole new world of interesting managerial circumstances to figure out now, as some people go back to offices and others don't. Oh, there's a cool comment here from Diane in the chat about something that they do. She says she has a weekly Zoom meeting where she opens up the meeting and all staff can call in or not, depending upon their mood. We can talk about work topics or just have personal chats. That's interesting. I haven't heard of anything like that before.
So we have a system called Remo, which is just like Zoom, but it looks like a room, so you can actually move between tables. So we have a staff room, but nobody goes there unless we invite them. So it's open to all staff at any time, but they don't use it unless we actually actively invite people in. But I think that one of the challenges, which I know we will all have experienced this, but is when you're sort of on a table of 4-6 people, you have to, only one person can talk. So they might be telling the story about their cat or their child or whatever it is, and the other 5 people have to sit and listen. And I think people missed the one-to-one. So we also created 2-person tables so that people could just go and talk to one person. And they still wanted it to be someone they didn't meet very regularly, but they wanted to be able to just talk one-to-one.
A good
Yeah,
idea.
that's a good idea. Yeah, it's weird because it's like you don't necessarily, I find myself for those one-to-one conversations, I find myself less likely to drop in on somebody virtually than I would in person. And so sometimes I'll just say, hey, do you have a minute to talk? And usually it's under the pretense of I have a question to ask you, but really I just want to talk to you for a while and not talk about work. So maybe as you know, we get more comfortable with this, it'll be more natural to just say, hey, I'm calling just to chat for a few minutes. All right, I'll go ahead and launch another poll here to ask another question. I'm going to skip over one of them, Brooke, and go to the 5th one. So this here is, what is most challenging about building remote team culture? Just a few more responses coming in. All right, anyone else to add before? All right, there we go. All right. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll, share the results. So this is interesting. I think Zoom fatigue is definitely a big one. I know that we all experience it. I think with our team, we have said, you know, look, if you need to be off camera sometimes, please do so. And I find myself needing to be off camera from time to time too, just to just give myself a break. There's something that's just so draining about being on camera. I don't know if it's just that you think everyone is staring at you the whole time and you have to have a certain expression. You can't look distracted. So for us anyway, we do have the opportunity to turn our cameras off as needed. Does anybody else want to comment on how they tackle Zoom fatigue?
I find that most difficult to deal with when I am doing a phone call with an editor or a member that, you know, back in the day used to literally just be a phone call that I would pick up and answer, and I could make whatever face or expression I wanted to react to what they were saying. And now I have to be very careful not to show any, you know, feelings other than support to them whenever they're talking. That has been a real adjustment for me, for sure, that I would love to go back to just picking up a phone versus this.
It's funny, like sometimes when I do talk to people on just the phone though, I swear I think I have a hard time hearing them or a hard time understanding what they're saying because I'm so used to seeing people's mouths now and the words coming out that I'm like, oh yeah. Anybody else have any comments on Zoom fatigue and what you do to deal with it, or how it affects you? John?
For my team, we decided on a rule. If it was just going to be one-on-one, we would use the old-fashioned telephone.
Okay.
So
does that even work anymore? The old-fashioned? I'm just kidding.
It doesn't. It really doesn't. I have like no service at my house, so that's been an issue. So we'll do one-on-one, or we'll do Teams or Zoom without video. We just have that as our norm. And yeah. I think they appreciate it and it helps with the fatigue. But if we're more than 2 or 3, then we'll do it.
That's a good idea.
There's a couple comments in the chat about it too, which I find interesting. Slammed with work and there's just no time to build anything. Yeah, I can totally relate to that. And I'm sure a lot of people can on the call today. That's really tough to balance.
It is really tough. And one of the other poll questions we have, which I skipped, but I think kind of gets at this, is lack of time. So the question I was going to ask was, are you guys very deliberate about building team culture? And if so, is there someone who's in charge of it? You're right, it does take time. And I will say it doesn't take time just in the present moment, but it also takes time over time. It's something you have to build. So I think even if you can do little things that you don't have to extend a lot of time to develop, even that alone will go a long way. So I'm curious too about the people who responded with limited types of fun. It's actually only one person who responded with that, unique ways to connect. The reason I asked that, I put that in there as a response, was because I have found myself lacking creativity in terms of way to connect over Zoom after a while. It's like, how many coffee breaks can we do? What kind of questions can I ask? I'm just curious, like, does anybody else have any kind of fun ways that they've done connection and team culture in a remote environment that's not just a coffee break? Or I know, Claire, you talked about spinning the wheel. Anything else?
Well, we also have lunches, which is a mixed bag, honestly, because then you're eating on Zoom.
Yeah.
But we do that because we have a hybrid office, so everyone in the office goes around the conference table, and then it's us up on Zoom. So it's good that we're all sharing a meal together, but then we're also seeing the catering come in for the people in the office, as we have like cereal. And the thing is,
ice cream.
Right, and they do have an ice cream bar at ECG, which I keep hearing about. And I'm hoping to get into it next week. But we do joke about it, like we try to make it a funny thing, so no one's uncomfortable. And you can shut your camera off if you're eating spinach or something like that. But it's definitely like we're talking about that elephant in the room, where some of us are up on, because they have us on a projector, on the wall. So we look bigger and like we're there, but they're still like tiny and stuff. But I think that those lunches are fun. And that's like when people are talking about food, and it kind of gets more into a familiar conversation. And so then we talk about concerts we go to, and if we're going to concerts, and even the food we're eating and our favorite types of food. I mean, everything comes up around food, and even like, oh, my dog ate this. And so I find that is really good, although it can be uncomfortable, I understand.
Juanita?
We have weekly stand-ups in our wider department, but they're themed. So whoever's in organising the stand-up for that week, they'll just let everyone know what the question is. So it could be like, what's your favourite film? What's your favourite character from a film? A recent one we had was, what was the best Christmas market that you've been to or want to go to, or something like that. So it's just what I call remaining human in a very remote world, because we had some people who always worked remotely, some people will work remotely, some people do hybrid, whatever, but it's still remaining that we're still human in a remote world, and wanting to feel connected to people and having that culture that we want to remain. It's a different culture now, but yeah.
Thank you. Brooke, did you want to wrap up?
Oh gosh, yeah, it's already almost 10:55. Wow. Okay. Well, thank you guys for all of your thoughts and discussion. This has been really interesting. I'm going to share my screen again really quick, just to go over some closing slides. So give me 1 minute, please.
And also just thank you all for participating and having such a good discussion. I think this was really interesting, and it was really fun to hear all of your thoughts on this really important topic. And I learned a lot. So thank you.
Oops. Sorry, guys. Give me 1 second to get to the end. You get to look at these slides again. All right. So just a couple ISMTE related slides here to wrap things up. ISMTE is hosting Origin Reports, and they're going to be presenting a showcase of their new reporting tool, which is very cool. I've seen it and recommend checking it out. So December 9th is the date of this tour, and live attendees will receive 2 months of free access to Origin Reports if you attend. And then there are also a couple more Office Hour events coming up in the new year. January 13th, there's one on improving the quality of peer review. And January 20th is one on the pros and cons of working remotely, which ties in nicely to what we've been talking about here today. And if you're interested in hosting an office hours, I would highly recommend it. It's easy to do. There is a form that you can fill out to submit a proposal on any topic that you think would be of interest. I think Donna is going to put a link to that in the chat if you want to check it out. And along the same lines, if you are interested in volunteering, ISMTE would love to have you. There are a number of committees that are full of members giving their time and talents to support the society. So there should be a link in the chat to sign up if you're interested. You can also feel free to hang on the line after this Zoom concludes so we can talk if you have any questions or comments about committees or ISMTE in general. If you're not already a member, we would definitely encourage you to consider joining. ISMTE has a host of benefits for its members, a handful of which are on the screen here. ISMTE.org has a lot more information. And again, feel free to hang out if you want to chat with me and Erin and Donna about ISMTE. And once again, we have to thank our sponsor, J&J Editorial, for supporting this session. Very cool of you to do that. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and conclude the office hour session for today. Give me 1 second here. Thank you again to everybody for attending and sharing your thoughts with us. We hope that you have a great, happy, and healthy holiday and start for 2022. I can't believe it's almost here already. Thank you, everyone.
Take care, everyone.